In this video, we're going to talk about another reading strategy. This one is called Teaching Text Structures with Graphic Organizers. Now, prior to watching this video, you should have watched the overview of this strategy with Jennifer Gonzalez, who is the person who runs the website Cult of Pedagogy. And if you haven't been exposed to that website before, I highly recommend that you check it out. She has a ton of great resources available specific to supporting students with reading, learning to read, but also a range of other topics. So after watching that video, to get an understanding of what this strategy is, I wanted to then provide you with a concrete example of what it looks like in practice. So we'll move forward. And so just to talk a little bit about why this is a useful strategy. So the purpose of teaching students to approach reading from the lens of text structures and to use a graphic organizer to start to map text structures is that it helps make explicit the discourse level organization of texts. And last week when we talked about writing, we talked a lot about how it's important for students to understand the way that texts are organized, how language is put together so that they can then write. But it's also important for them to understand that with their reading, because once students understand how texts are organized, it helps support them in their reading comprehension, and it helps them be able to better find important information within a text. For multilingual learners in particular, it helps make visible for them the ways that school-based texts in English are commonly structured. It provides a low-stakes opportunity for students to engage in discussion about the text with their peers. So parsing out the text with a graphic organizer with a partner or a small group is a very low stakes activity. It also builds content knowledge, which can support future reading comprehension activities, and it provides multilingual learners with a framework to gain deeper knowledge when they encounter new texts. So those are a few of the reasons why I think this is a powerful strategy. All right, so let's just go through one example so you can see what this looks like in practice. I chose description as the text structure we're going to use because it's one that's commonly seen in schools, especially for reports or for informational texts. So with this structure of the text, the author is explaining a topic, idea, person, place, or thing, and they're providing characteristics, features, and examples to do that. The focus is on one thing and its components. So you see here in the middle of the topic, and then these different traits, or what we called last week, maybe subtopics, and then details about that trait is one way of designing this. Okay, so I pulled a text from NASA's website. NASA has some great texts that are available for students at different ages. This is a K4 age text, probably more towards the 4th grade, focused on hurricanes. So I'm going to read it aloud, and then we're going to talk about how we could deconstruct this text using a graphic organizer with students. What are hurricanes? Hurricanes are large, swirling storms. They produce winds of 119 kilometers per hour or higher. That's faster than a cheetah, the fastest animal on land. Winds from a hurricane can damage buildings and trees. Hurricanes form over warm ocean waters. Sometimes they strike land. When a hurricane reaches land, it pushes a wall of ocean water ashore. This wall of water is called a storm surge. Heavy rain and storm surge from a hurricane can cause flooding. Once a hurricane forms, weather forecasters predict its path. They also predict how strong it will get. This information helps people get ready for the storm. Right, and we're going to read one last section before we deconstruct it. There are 5 types or categories of hurricanes. The scale of categories is called the Saffir-Simpson hurricane scale. The categories are based on wind speed. And then here we have the 5 categories, which you could read with your students, but you see faster than a cheetah, baseball, the speed of many professional tennis players, swings, the world's fastest roller coaster, and finally the speed of some high-speed trains. So after reading this text with students, we then want to begin to identify the topic traits and details in this passage. So this is something that I would recommend that you first do as a whole class, the first time they ever encounter a description, and you're using a graphic organizer to break apart a text in this way. But then as you continue using these tools, students can begin doing these in small groups, and you can have students be applying this skill to other texts. All right, so first we'll look for the topic. Hurricanes, right? We can identify that from the title and from the different subtopics. And we see our first trait. Hurricanes are large swirling storms. With what follows are the details that talk about these storms and how fast they move and what they do. Then we have another trait. They form over ocean waters. Sometimes they strike land, and then it gives some more details about that. Once they form, weather forecasters predict the path, and then some details. So you can see this nice structure forming between traits and details. We also see that with this final section, that there are 5 types of hurricanes. That's our trait, which we also could maybe call a topic sentence, right? And then we have these details that are giving more information about that. So if we were to map this out with students, we'd have hurricanes at the center of our graphic organizer. The first trait that we have is a definition, and then we see some of the ways that it's defined. Then we have formation as the next subtopic or trait, and it talks about how they form. And then there's some details about the water wall coming ashore and the flooding. Then we have prevention. So what weather forecasters do, weather forecasters predict its path, and then we have some information about that to predict how strong it gets, how people prepare. And finally, we have the types, and then more specific information about those 5 categories. So you can see how we're grouping the information that we're taking from this text and then identifying the details that came out of it. Breaking up the text in this way makes it so much easier for multilingual learners, but even for all students, to comprehend what's in the text, take out those key ideas and see the text. And I wanted to mention that not all informational texts are use this description format. So you do need to pay attention to the text itself and what graphic organizers make sense to use with it. So this one, for example, is another article from the NASA Knows series, and it's about climate change. And so if we were to read through it, we would see it first talks about weather, then it talks about climate. So it's comparing climate and weather. And you might already be thinking, well, if it's comparing 2 things, how they're similar and different, a good format might be, a good graphic organizer might be a Venn diagram, because we're comparing and contrasting. So the text structure for this one is compare contrast. So I want students to be pulling out information. I would be better served to use a graphic organizer that reflects the text structure. And that's something I hope you take away from this video and once you leave this course, something I hope that sticks with you is that graphic organizers should match the purpose of the text. In this case, text structure. They should reflect the structure of the text. It's really important that we think about using tools for our multilingual learners and for all of our students that will help them be successful, because they explicitly build upon what we already see in the text, the way they're already organized. All right, so that is it for this video. I am going to include some resources for you below that include some examples of text structures commonly found in informational texts. You see 2 that we just talked about, description and then comparison contrast, and here's a few others. And I encourage you to start using more graphic organizers when you're having students read, so that they can to support their comprehension and help them to pick out important information from the text.